Welcome to the Mystery and History channel. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more videos like this one. On the steps of Hiroshima, Japan, on August 6, 1945, dark marks were left after the atomic detonation. The intense heat changed the color of exposed surfaces, preserving outlines of people and objects, later documented as evidence of the thermal effects of that nuclear episode. In Baton Rouge, Louisiana, United States, in 1863, Gordon, also known as Peter, arrived at a Union camp after escaping the system of slavery. His photograph was published by Harper's Weekly and used by abolitionists to expose the harshness of slavery during the American Civil War. In a rural region of Mongolia in 1913, a woman appears held in a wooden structure used as public punishment. The record, attributed to early 20th century photographic expeditions, shows local disciplinary practices before the reforms that would change the country in the following decades. After the liberation of Buchenwald, near Weimar, Germany, on April 11, 1945, a young survivor appears as American soldiers recorded names and organized basic aid. More than 20,000 people were found at the site, making this one of the most remembered records from the end of the German regime. In Ohrdruf, Germany, on April 12, 1945, Generals Dwight Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, and George Patton visited a recently liberated facility connected to Buchenwald. People found at the site showed the Allies the conditions in the area, and the visit helped document abuses by the German regime at the end of World War II. In France, in the 1850s, physician Guillaume Benjamin Amand Duchenne recorded studies using mild electrical stimulation applied to facial muscles. His research sought to understand how the face expresses emotions and helped form an early foundation for modern studies on neurology, photography, and human expression. At dawn on April 26, 1986, in Chernobyl, in the then Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, the structure of reactor number 4 appears severely damaged after the failure. The episode released radiation, led to the evacuation of Pripyat residents, and began a major containment operation at the Soviet nuclear power plant. Attributed to the Belgian Congo in 1955, the image shows an African boy sitting inside a cage-like structure, watched by 2 white children. The record is associated with the colonial context, marked by racial inequality, social hierarchies, and images used at the time to normalize power relations in domestic spaces. At the Kennedy Space Center in Florida on January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger lifted off for the mission that would take teacher Krista McAuliffe into space. 73 seconds later, the spacecraft suffered a critical failure over the Atlantic, resulting in 7 human losses and changing rules at the American Space Agency. In Washington State, United States, on May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens became active after weeks of tremors and volcanic signs. The event sent up a huge column of volcanic material, removed part of the mountain's summit, caused 57 losses, and transformed the surrounding landscape. In the medical archives of Utrecht in the Netherlands in 1890, a child was portrayed with congenital melanocytic nevus, a dark mark present since birth. The record was part of European clinical documentation used by hospitals to study and catalog dermatological conditions in the 19th century. Sitting in a trench on the Western Front around 1916, a World War I soldier appears with signs of severe psychological distress, then called shell shock. The condition affected many service members exposed to artillery, constant tension, and long periods under pressure on the European fronts. Under the structures installed in the gymnasium of the Nuremberg prison in Germany in October 1946, a prepared table appears connected to the carrying out of sentences for German leaders convicted in the trials that began in November 1945. The record shows the judicial end of the regime's high command after World War II. In Victorian England, at the West Riding Asylum in Wakefield, a patient appears restrained in a device used in 19th century psychiatric treatment. The record shows medical practices that are now outdated and helps explain debates about mental health, institutional control, and social isolation at the time. Aboard the British ship HMS Sphinx around 1907, a sailor removes chains from the leg of a man recently freed from captivity. The scene was recorded during patrols against human exploitation networks along the coast between Zanzibar and Mozambique, when the Royal Navy intercepted vessels under investigation at sea. In Saint Augustine, Florida, on June 18, 1964, James Brock, manager of the Monson Motor Lodge, poured a chemical into the pool during an action against anti-segregation participants. The episode happened during civil rights mobilizations and gained national attention before the Civil Rights Act was passed. In Italy in 1944, during the Allied campaign in World War II, a soldier appears sharing rations with two Italian children. The scene records contact between troops and civilians in areas affected by the conflict, when food, shelter, and basic aid were an important part of daily survival. On Whitehall Street in Atlanta, Georgia, in 1864, George N. Barnard photographed the front of a business connected to the market of enslaved people. The photo was taken during the American Civil War, when Union troops reached the city and documented signs of slavery in the southern United States. Recorded in China at the end of the 19th century, the portrait shows a woman with feet modified by the old custom of lotus feet. The practice began in childhood, limited movement, and became a sign of status in part of Chinese society. Reforms and public campaigns helped its decline in the 20th century. At Cape Canaveral, Florida, on November 29, 1961, the chimpanzee Enos waited inside the Mercury Atlas V mission capsule before launch. He became the first primate to orbit Earth, completing 2 orbits and helping test systems later used in the United States space program. In China, around 1905, a man feeds a person held in a cangue, a wooden structure used as public punishment. The scene belongs to the final years of the Qing dynasty, which ended in 1912, when traditional punishment practices were still displayed in streets and markets before the local population. Inside a psychiatric institution in the Netherlands in 1938, a person appears restrained in a chair used for institutional control. The record shows medical practices that are now abandoned, common before the post-war humanitarian reforms, and helps explain the history of mental health treatment. During the hunger winter in the Netherlands between 1944 and 1945, a child appears with a spoon attached to clothing while families searched for food. The shortage of resources affected areas under German control, especially the urban west of the country, and marked the final months of World War II in Europe for civilians. Known in European shows in the early 20th century, Jean Libera was born in Rome in 1884 with a rare congenital condition involving his brother Jacques attached to his torso. His appearance in circuses and medical exhibitions drew public attention and showed the limits of medicine before the modern exams of the time. During World War II, in a dangerous area of Europe, a soldier carries a donkey on his shoulders to stop the animal from walking freely. The scene shows practical care on military fronts, where objects on the ground could endanger troops, civilians, and animals used for transport during movement. Near Hanoi, North Vietnam, in September 1967, a young member of local forces leads a United States Air Force lieutenant after his aircraft went down. The record shows the detention of pilots during the Vietnam War and the participation of local groups, peasants, and North Vietnamese forces during the period. On the streets of Birmingham, Alabama, United States in 1963, police used dogs during civil rights demonstrations against racial segregation. The images, published by the national press, increased public pressure for change and came before the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Near Boston City Hall in Massachusetts on April 5, 1976, Ted Landsmark was attacked during protests against school desegregation. The scene, captured by Stanley Foreman, became known as the Soiling of Old Glory and became a symbol of social divisions tied to mandatory school busing. Among smoke and structural remains in London in 1944, emergency crews remove a woman after the impact of a German V-2 rocket. The scene, recorded by George Roger, documents the long-range attacks launched against the city in the final months of World War II and the urgent work of rescuers. Before authorities in Leon County, Florida in 1978, the defendant connected to the Chi Omega sorority case heard the formal reading of the charges. The proceedings, held after the episode at Florida State University, received public attention and marked an important stage in judicial trials in the United States. In Selma, Alabama, on March 7, 1965, John Lewis appears protecting his head during the police action against the voting rights protest. The episode happened after demonstrators crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge and became known as Bloody Sunday, increasing national support for the Voting Rights Act. Photographed in the United States around 1890, Fannie Mills became known as the Ohio Bigfoot Girl because of Milroy disease, which enlarged her legs and feet. Her presence in popular shows also attracted doctors and the public, reflecting the 19th century interest in rare physical conditions. During the German advance into the Soviet Union in 1941, Heinrich Himmler appears in front of a detained Soviet serviceman at a facility on the Eastern Front. The photo, attributed to Franz Geich, records the presence of German leadership near military structures and the harsh treatment imposed on detainees. In the village of Deg, near Goris in southern Armenia, in 1990, a 106-year-old woman was photographed by Armine Iohannis holding a weapon in front of her home. The scene happened during instability in the Caucasus and shows local residents prepared to defend their families and property in rural areas. Connected to the British royal family, two relatives of Queen Elizabeth II were kept away from public life in the 20th century because of cognitive limitations. The case came to light in 1987, creating debate about family secrecy, care institutions, and the rights of people with special needs in the United Kingdom. Escorted by authorities in Japan in 1947, Yoshio Kodera appears with his face covered by a straw basket as he arrives in custody. The image was made during the post-war occupation period when Japanese courts reviewed cases from the recent period and authorities tried to control public exposure of those involved. At Wembley Park in London in 1938, a family walks while wearing protective equipment during a public demonstration before World War II. As tension grew in Europe, the British government distributed millions of these items to civilians, fearing chemical threats similar to those seen in World War I. Seen from the sky over Giza, Egypt in the early 20th century, the photo records the pyramids from a hot air balloon. The unusual angle shows the surrounding desert, cultivated areas near the Nile, and the early use of aerial photography to document ancient monuments before commercial aviation became popular. Inside the Soviet Sputnik 2 capsule, launched from Baikonur in present-day Kazakhstan on November 3, 1957, the dog Laika began the first Earth orbit made by an animal. The mission marked the space race, tested life support systems, and raised ethical debates about the first space flights. Moving over Midway, Indiana, on April 11, 1965, 2 tornado funnels appeared during the Palm Sunday outbreak. The system produced dozens of tornadoes across the Midwestern United States, left severe damage in rural and urban communities, and became one of the country's most remembered weather events. On the deck of the American aircraft carrier Enterprise during World War II in the Pacific, ground crews run to help a pilot after a fighter's emergency landing. The smoke shows the dangers of naval operations, where sailors had to act quickly to contain flames and protect crew members. On the morning of October 22, 1895, Montparnasse Station in Paris became the scene of a rare railroad incident. A train coming from Granville failed to brake, broke through the terminal wall, and fell onto the street, reaching an outside stand. The scene became a striking record of railroad history. During Operation Babylift in April 1975, Vietnamese children appear placed in boxes inside an airplane during the final days of the Vietnam War. More than 3,000 children were taken for adoption in the United States and other countries in a mission marked by urgency, instability, and intense humanitarian debate. On April 27, 1945, in the German town of Kronach, Sergeant Francis Daggert of the Military Police of the United States 11th Armored Division appears holding the hand of a 10-year-old boy recruited by German forces, a record connected to the military collapse of the German regime in the final days of the war. Hanging from the 5th floor of a building in Berlin in 1945, a damaged airplane reveals the urban scene at the end of World War II. The German capital was suffering from air offensives, street fighting, and collapsing infrastructure as Soviet troops advanced before the final capture of the city in May. On the damp floor of Berlin's underground shelter in 1945, a military cap appears covered with dirt and mold after the city was taken. The site served as a command center during the final days of the German regime and was found damaged, wet, and abandoned after the end of World War II in Europe. In Berlin, Germany, in April 1945, the Führer bunker served as an underground shelter and command center during the final days of the German regime. As Soviet troops advanced on the city, the site became the center of final decisions in the war in Europe and became linked to the historic fall of Berlin in May 1945. From the top of the Dresden City Hall Tower in Germany on February 15, 1945, the old town appears severely damaged after the Allied air offensives from February 13th to February 15th. The episode affected the historic center, caused around 25,000 losses, and became one of the most remembered records of the war. In the port of Casablanca, Morocco, in November 1942, the French battleship Jean Bart appears damaged after fighting United States naval forces during Operation Torch. Even unfinished, the Richelieu-class ship was used by the Vichy government and became a symbol of French tensions in the war. In the early morning of August 16, 1977, in Memphis, Tennessee, Elvis Presley was photographed returning to Graceland in his car. Considered his last known photograph, the scene shows an ordinary moment away from the stage, only a few hours before his passing, ending a central career in popular music. Among structural remains in Singapore, on February 26, 1942, a Chinese man feeds a girl after Japanese offensives during World War II. The scene records civilians trying to maintain basic routines while the city, recently captured by Japan, faced damage, lack of resources, and military control. With residents gathered in front of houses, Strasbourg, France, appears at the moment of its liberation on November 23, 1944. The city returned to French control with the advance of the 2nd Armored Division after years under German rule, becoming a symbol of Alsace's recovery in World War II. During the liberation of Italy in 1945, an elderly Italian woman hugs and kisses an American soldier in front of local residents. The scene records contact between civilians and Allied troops after years of war, when Italian cities received aid, transport, and protection as the conflict came to an end in Europe. In an open cockpit during World War I, between 1914 and 1918, a British aviator prepares a small device for manual release. Before modern sights and automatic systems, crew members depended on visual calculation, wind and low altitude to reach targets, showing the beginning of military aviation. In an old photograph, probably connected to Halloween, a child dressed as a clown appears on a tree, wearing a mask and dark clothing. The record circulates as a North American image from the early decades of the 20th century, but there is no confirmed original location or reliable documentary context about who appears in the scene. In the heat of the Vietnam War, around 1969, an American soldier shows the marked helmet that reportedly helped protect him during an operation. The record highlights the importance of personal equipment in military areas and recalls the dangers faced by troops on patrols, at bases, and during ground movements. In a New Mexico junkyard in the United States in 1962, a disc-shaped object appears among old cars, recalling the post-war flying saucer craze. The scene reflects popular fascination with unidentified flying objects, science fiction, and mysteries tied to the American Southwest since the Roswell case in 1947. In Budapest, Hungary in 1945, buildings appear damaged after the Siege of Budapest, which took place between December 1944 and February 1945. The battle left much of the city in ruins, destroyed bridges over the Danube River, and marked the beginning of a long reconstruction after World War II. In La Haye-du-Puits, France, on July 15, 1944, American soldiers make a toast at a sidewalk table after the town's liberation in World War II. Robert McCurdy, Harold Smith, and Richard Bennett appear among ruins, in a rare moment of pause during the Normandy campaign. During the Blitz in the United Kingdom, between 1940 and 1941, even pets received improvised forms of protection against aerial threats. The photo shows a cat inside a small box with a viewing window, tied to fears of gas and explosives, as families adapted domestic life to civil defense rules. At the Cook County Penal Institution in Chicago, United States, in 1927, officials examine an electric chair installed to replace earlier capital punishment methods. The image records the adoption of standardized legal equipment and the operation of the American judicial system in the late 1920s. Along a New York sidewalk in 1932, a line of men waits for cheap food during the Great Depression. The sign advertises meals for just a few cents, showing how the economic crisis left workers without income and made lines for bread, soup, and shelter a common part of urban life in the United States. At only 4 years old, a child from a rural family in the United States appears helping with the potato harvest in 1931 during the Great Depression. The crisis that began in 1929 reduced income, jobs, and food, leading many farm families to depend on everyone's help to maintain daily life. On July 4, 1905, possibly in Pueblo, Colorado, United States, spectators watch a high-diving horse attraction, common at fairs and parks. The act made the animal descend from a tower toward a pool, a popular practice between the late 19th century and the early 20th century. In the United States, in 1925, aviator Gladys Roy and Ivan Unger from the Flying Black Hats aerial group played tennis on the wings of an airplane during a performance. The scene belongs to the aerial stunt shows of the 1920s, when pilots and performers did daring acts to attract crowds in local newspapers. In Colorado Springs, United States, in 1899, Nikola Tesla appears beside his magnifying transmitter during studies on electricity. The image, made with double exposure technique, helped publicize his high-voltage tests and his ideas about wireless energy transmission over long distances. During the Apollo 9 mission in March 1969, David Scott partially exited the gumdrop command module while Earth appeared in the background. The test in Earth orbit checked suits, hatches, and spacewalk procedures, preparing essential steps before crewed lunar trips. Marked by years in professional hockey, Terry Sawchuk, goalie for the Toronto Maple Leafs, was portrayed in 1966 with accumulated physical signs from before masks became common. The image recalls the dangers faced by National Hockey League athletes in Canada and the debate over protection in the sport. During a performance in Berlin, Germany in 1933, a circus performer entered a glass car with exotic animals in front of the audience. The act was part of popular shows of the time, which combined curiosity, supervised performance, and newspaper promotion to attract large local urban crowds. In Barlow, Yorkshire, the British airship R-33 gets ready for its first flight on March 6, 1919. Built after World War I, it was a rigid model based on German Zeppelin technology and was later used for tests, experimental transport, and observation missions in the United Kingdom. In the Belgian Congo in 1930, Italian explorer Attilio Gatti appears beside two hired local men and a gorilla taken during an expedition. The photo records colonial practices of exploration and wildlife documentation in Central Africa, a common subject in European accounts from the 1920s and 1930s. In Saigon, South Vietnam, in 1968, Lo Man Hung appears taking photographs near a military vehicle during the Vietnam War. At about 12 years old, he became known as one of the youngest photojournalists of that period, documenting the Tet Offensive and selling images to local and international press agencies. Inside a school in the United States in 1962, children practiced the drill of ducking and protecting themselves under desks during the Cold War. Drills like this, known as duck and cover, were part of civil preparedness amid fear of nuclear threats, especially after the Cuban Missile Crisis. On the Brooklyn Bridge in New York, on October 7, 1914, painters appear suspended by ropes during maintenance work on the structure. Opened on May 24, 1883, the bridge connected Manhattan to Brooklyn and required constant care to protect its cables, towers, and walkways above the urban East River. If you enjoyed this video and want to support the channel, please use the Super Thanks tool below. Your contribution helps us keep bringing you amazing historical content. Thank you so much for your support, and see you in the next video.